My brother told my parents I was unfit to raise my own kids. He said, I should be their guardian. So I reported his sketchy side business to the IRS, now he can't afford to fight me in court. Story 1. So, I've never been one to air my family drama publicly, but this one's too much to keep bottled up. My brother tried to take my kids, yes, my kids. The people I brought into this world and love more than anything. And the worst part? He almost got away with it. But I fought back, and now he's paying for it in ways he never saw coming. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Lila, 37, married to Bryce, 39. We live in a little Indiana town, the kind of place that still has 4th of July parades and pancake breakfasts at the fire station. We've got 2 kids, Ellie, 7, and Max, 5. Bryce works long, hard hours as a paramedic, saving lives, and I run a handmade jewelry business from home. It's nothing glamorous, but it helps with bills and gives me time with the kids. Life's not perfect, but it's ours. Then there's my brother Zebediah, Zeb for short. He's 40 and the poster child for fake success. Zeb's one of those guys who always has a new big idea or side hustle that's going to make him a millionaire any day now. He's loud, charming in a sleazy kind of way, and completely full of himself. Growing up, he was the golden child. Our parents worshipped the ground he walked on. He was good at sports, popular, and could charm his way out of any trouble. Me? I was the quiet one, the artsy one. I never needed a spotlight, but sometimes I wished someone would notice me the way they noticed him. Zeb and I have never been close, but I never thought he'd do something like this. It all started last Thanksgiving. My parents and Zeb came over for dinner. Bryce and I had spent all day cooking and cleaning, trying to make it nice. Zeb showed up late, of course, and immediately started acting like he owned the place. He made these little digs about how small our house was, how cute it was that I had a hobby business, and even cracked a joke about Bryce being a glorified ambulance driver. Bryce just smiled and ignored him, but I could see the irritation building. The real drama started over dessert. We were all sitting around the table when Zeb, out of nowhere, said, "You know, it must be hard for you guys, juggling work and the kids and everything. I can't even imagine." I just nodded, trying to keep the peace. "It's busy, but we manage." "Well," Zeb said, leaning back like he was the king of some castle, "if anything ever happened to you two, I'd be happy to step in and take care of Ellie and Max. I mean, kids need stability, and with everything you've got going on, I think I could give them a more secure life." I swear the room went silent. Bryce stared at him, then at me, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I felt my stomach drop. "What the hell are you talking about?" Bryce finally asked, his voice calm but sharp. Zeb shrugged like it was no big deal. "I'm just saying, you guys have a lot on your plate. If something were to happen, it might make sense for me to step in as their guardian. You know, for their sake." I couldn't even speak. My mom jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "Zeb's just trying to be helpful," she said, giving me this look like I should be grateful. Grateful? For what? For my brother swooping in and implying I couldn't take care of my own kids? Bryce stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "We're doing just fine, thanks," he said, his voice tight. He grabbed the empty pie dish and stormed off to the kitchen. I sat there, frozen, feeling humiliated, angry, and confused all at once. The weeks after that were a nightmare. Zeb wasn't just talking, he was serious. He started calling my parents constantly, telling them I was overwhelmed, that the kids weren't getting enough attention, that Bryce was too busy with his job to be present. He told them I was running myself ragged with my little jewelry project and that it wasn't fair to Ellie and Max. And my parents? They started listening to him. My mom began asking weird questions, like if I was sure I didn't need help or if the kids had enough clothes for winter. My dad made a comment about how Bryce must be so stressed out all the time, like that was some kind of failing. It didn't take a genius to figure out where they were getting this from. Then Zeb crossed the line. He hired a lawyer. I found out when a friend of mine, who works in family law, called me up one day. She said she'd seen my name come up in some documents and thought I should know. Zeb had been talking to an attorney about filing for guardianship of Ellie and Max. He was actually trying to make a legal case that Bryce and I were unfit parents. When I heard that, something inside me snapped. Zeb wasn't just being a jerk, he was coming for my family. And I wasn't going to let him. I knew Zeb was shady, but I didn't know just how shady until I started digging. Bryce and I spent a few nights combing through Zeb's social media, his old business websites, and anything else we could find online. It didn't take long to uncover his latest venture. Zeb had been running a cash-only consulting firm that seemed suspiciously vague about what it actually did. The photos he posted of himself with wads of cash didn't exactly scream legitimate business. I remembered one Thanksgiving years ago when Zeb had bragged about how he'd figured out how to game the system. He said something about not needing to pay taxes on cash income if you kept your books creative enough. At the time, I thought it was just more of his BS. But now? I realized he might actually be stupid enough to think he could cheat the IRS. So, I did what I had to do. I filed an anonymous tip. I included everything: screenshots, links, photos, even a post where Zeb had joked about how the IRS would never catch him. I knew it was risky, but what choice did I have? Zeb was trying to take my kids away. I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. After reporting Zeb to the IRS, I knew it would take time for anything to happen. Government agencies aren't exactly known for their speed. But while I waited, I had to deal with Zeb's continued attempts to turn my parents against me. Every phone call with them turned into an argument. They kept saying things like, "Zeb's just worried about the kids, or he only wants what's best for everyone." It was infuriating. I couldn't understand how they couldn't see through him. But then again, they'd spent their whole lives falling for his charm. This wasn't new, it was just on a much bigger, more personal scale. Bryce and I decided to fight back in the meantime. We contacted a lawyer ourselves, just in case Zeb actually tried to file for guardianship. Our lawyer told us that Zeb's case was laughable and would never hold up in court, but still, better safe than sorry. I also started documenting everything, every text message, every weird comment from my parents, every suspicious thing Zeb did. If he wanted a fight, I'd be ready. It took a few months, but one day, I got a call from my lawyer. She sounded excited. The IRS had officially opened an investigation into Zeb's consulting firm. They were auditing him. Bryce and I didn't say anything to anyone, but I couldn't help but feel a little smug. Finally, he was going to face some consequences for his shady behavior. It didn't take long for things to start falling apart for Zeb. His accounts were frozen, and he was hit with a massive tax bill for unpaid income. Apparently, he hadn't just been avoiding taxes on his consulting income, he'd also been claiming fake deductions for years. The IRS wasn't playing around. They even slapped him with penalties for fraud, which basically doubled the amount he owed. Zeb, of course, panicked. He started selling off everything he could to pay the fines: his car, his fancy gadgets, even some of his furniture. His consulting firm collapsed, and the people he'd been working with started turning on him. From what I heard, they were spilling all kinds of dirt to the IRS to save their own skins. Once the IRS investigation became public knowledge, my parents couldn't ignore it anymore. My mom called me in tears one night, saying she didn't understand how Zeb could have been so reckless. "He's always been such a hard worker," she said, like that was some kind of excuse. I didn't rub it in, even though I wanted to. Instead, I just said, "Mom, this is who Zeb has always been. You just didn't want to see it." She didn't have much to say after that. Zeb, on the other hand, was furious. He must have suspected I had something to do with his downfall because he started blowing up my phone with angry texts. He called me every name in the book and accused me of ruining his life. I didn't respond. What was the point? He'd done this to himself. Then, he tried to guilt-trip me. "I was just trying to help you and the kids," he wrote in one message. "You're ungrateful and selfish. I was going to give them a better life." I finally snapped and replied, "You weren't trying to help. You were trying to take my kids away from me, and now you're dealing with the consequences of your own actions. Leave us alone." He didn't text me again after that. With Zeb out of money and neck deep in legal troubles, his plans to take my kids were officially dead. He couldn't afford a lawyer, let alone the time and energy it would take to fight us in court. His perfect life was in ruins, and the best part? He had no one to blame but himself. But I wasn't done yet. Bryce and I decided to push things a little further. We knew Zeb had been bragging about his untouchable reputation in our hometown for years, so we made sure people knew the truth. We didn't spread rumors or anything, we just casually mentioned to a few mutual acquaintances that Zeb was being investigated for tax fraud. Word spread fast. Now, whenever Zeb walks into the diner or the grocery store, people give him side eyes and whispers follow him everywhere. His reputation is shot, and in a small town like ours, that's a big deal. He can't hustle people like he used to because no one trusts him anymore. These days, life is quieter. Bryce and I are still working hard, raising our kids, and making ends meet. My relationship with my parents is complicated. They've started being a little more supportive, but I can tell they're still holding on to some of their old biases. That's fine. I'm done trying to please them. My focus is on my own family now, the one Bryce and I built. As for Zeb? He's still out there, scrambling to rebuild his life. Last I heard, he'd taken a low-paying job in another town, far away from here. He's still bitter, but honestly, I don't care. He tried to destroy my family, and he failed. Now he's the one picking up the pieces. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that you don't mess with a mom. We may not look like much, but when you come for our kids, we'll do whatever it takes to protect them. And sometimes, karma just needs a little nudge to get moving. Story 2. For context, I work in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the accounting department of a logistics company. It's not glamorous, but I've been there for 8 years, and I've always been good at what I do. I don't mean to brag, but I've built a reputation as the guy who gets things done. I've never missed a deadline, never cut corners, and I always show up on time. I like to think I've earned the respect of my coworkers. Well, most of them. There's this guy, Bart. His full name is Bartholomew, but everyone calls him Bart. I wish I could say Bart was just another annoying coworker, but he's much worse. From the moment he joined the company about 2 years ago, he had this air about him, like he was better than everyone else. He was loud, arrogant, and always seemed to be in the middle of some conversation about how he was changing the game or shaking things up. At first, I didn't think much of him. I figured he was just one of those people who talks a big game but doesn't deliver. You know the type. Every office has one. But then I started noticing little things that made me realize Bart wasn't just annoying. He was dangerous. It started with rumors. Harmless enough at first, or so I thought. Someone mentioned in passing that Bart had said I was struggling to keep up with deadlines. I brushed it off because it wasn't true. My reports were always on time, and my numbers were solid. But then, other rumors started to surface. I overheard someone in the break room saying, "I heard Roderick missed that meeting with the big client last week." My name is Roderick, by the way. And no, I hadn't missed any meetings. I never miss meetings. Still, I let it go. I figured it was just a misunderstanding. But then it happened again. And again. And again. Suddenly, it wasn't just idle gossip. My manager, Ms. Plimpton, started pulling me into her office for performance reviews. She'd ask why my numbers were slipping or why I wasn't communicating issues sooner. I was stunned. My numbers weren't slipping. In fact, they were some of the best in the department. I tried to defend myself, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. Somewhere along the line, she'd bought into the narrative that Bart was spinning. At this point, I knew Bart was behind it. He had this way of dropping little comments in meetings, just enough to plant seeds of doubt without outright accusing me of anything. He'd say things like, "Well, I know Roderick's been handling a lot lately, so maybe we should double-check his numbers to be safe." Or, "Not everyone works the same way I do, but I think we need more accountability on this team." He was subtle, but the damage was being done. The breaking point came when I got passed over for a promotion. I'd been working toward the senior accountant position for years. I'd put in the hours, taken on extra projects, and built strong relationships with clients. Everyone in the office knew I was next in line. Or at least, I thought they did. When the promotion went to Bart, I was floored. Ms. Plimpton called me into her office to explain her decision. She said Bart had been showing initiative and stepping up in ways that the team really needed. Meanwhile, she said, my performance had been inconsistent lately. That word, inconsistent, felt like a slap in the face. I'd been nothing but consistent for 8 years. How could she believe this? I tried to keep my cool, but inside, I was fuming. Bart had managed to talk his way into a promotion that should have been mine. And worse, he dragged my name through the mud to do it. I went home that night and vented to my wife, Eloise. She's the calm, logical one in our relationship, and she reminded me that people like Bart always get caught eventually. "You just have to keep your head down and do your job," she said. "Let him dig his own grave." I wanted to believe her, but it wasn't that simple. Bart wasn't just annoying, he was malicious. And I had a feeling he wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, I stumbled across something that changed everything. Part of my job involves reconciling vendor invoices. It's tedious work, but I've always been meticulous about it. One day, I noticed something odd. A vendor we've worked with for years had been paid twice for the same invoice, a $25,000 mistake. I flagged it and started digging deeper, thinking it was just a clerical error. But the more I looked, the stranger it got. Over the past 6 months, there had been multiple double payments to the same vendor, totaling over $150,000. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The bank account the payments were going to didn't match the vendor's usual account. It was a personal account. Bart's account. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I double-checked everything to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. But there it was, plain as day. Bart had been embezzling money from the company, using fake invoices to funnel cash into his own account. My first instinct was to confront him, but I knew that wouldn't end well. Bart was a master manipulator, and if I accused him without proof, he'd find a way to turn it back on me. So I decided to bide my time and gather as much evidence as I could. For the next few weeks, I quietly collected everything I could find. Emails, transaction records, copies of the fake invoices, anything that tied Bart to the stolen money. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even Eloise. The last thing I needed was for Bart to catch wind of it before I was ready. But the whole time, I was on edge. Bart was still spreading rumors about me, still finding ways to undermine me in meetings. I started to feel paranoid, like everyone in the office was watching me, judging me. And maybe they were. After all, Bart had spent months convincing them I was incompetent. But I didn't care anymore. This wasn't just about me or my reputation. This was about right and wrong. Bart wasn't just a liar, he was a thief. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The night I submitted the evidence, I barely slept. I sent everything anonymously to the company's ethics hotline and filed a separate report with the FBI. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. After I sent the evidence, I felt like I was carrying a live wire in my chest. Every day, I came into work waiting for something to happen. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not even Eloise. It was hard enough to keep my cool around Bart. He was still walking around like he owned the place, grinning, laughing, and throwing out those little jabs at me during meetings. If he knew what was coming, he didn't show it. But then, one Tuesday morning, something happened. I got into the office early, as usual, and the vibe felt off. People were whispering in small groups, darting glances at Bart's desk. He wasn't there yet, but his computer was off, and his chair was pushed back like he'd left in a hurry. I pretended not to notice and went about my work, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. About an hour later, Bart walked in, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look smug. He looked pale, his usual confident strut replaced by a stiff, uneasy shuffle. He sat down at his desk and started typing furiously, barely looking up. I didn't say a word to him, but inside, I was grinning. I knew something was happening, and I knew it wasn't going to end well for him. Around lunchtime, the hammer came down. 2 men in suits walked into the office, flanked by 2 of our security guards. They made a beeline for Bart's desk. He tried to play it cool, standing up and smiling like he didn't have a care in the world, but his voice cracked when he said, "Can I help you?" One of the men pulled out a badge. "Bartholomew, we need you to come with us. You're under investigation for embezzlement." The entire office went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Bart stammered, trying to deny everything, but the men weren't having it. They told him he had the right to remain silent and started escorting him out. As they passed by my desk, Bart's eyes met mine. For a split second, I saw panic in his face. He knew. After Bart was gone, the office exploded into chatter. People were whispering, asking each other what had happened. A few people even came up to me, speculating about whether Bart had been stealing money. I just shrugged and kept working, pretending I didn't know anything. Later that afternoon, Ms. Plimpton called an emergency meeting. She confirmed that Bart had been caught embezzling company funds and that the authorities were handling it. She didn't go into details, but she said the company would be reviewing its internal controls to ensure something like this wouldn't happen again. When she finished, she turned to me. "Roderick, can I see you in my office?" I followed her into her office, my heart pounding. For a second, I worried she'd somehow figured out that I was the one who reported Bart. But when she spoke, her tone was softer than usual. "Roderick, I owe you an apology," she said. "I realize now that I was wrong to question your performance. It's clear to me that you've been doing excellent work, and I regret letting anyone convince me otherwise." She went on to say that the senior accountant position Bart had taken was now vacant and that, if I was still interested, she wanted to offer it to me. I accepted, of course, but I kept my reaction calm and professional. Inside, I was jumping for joy. The fallout from Bart's arrest was massive. Word spread quickly that he'd been embezzling over $150,000, and as the investigation unfolded, it turned out he'd been stealing from his previous job, too. He had forged invoices, redirected payments, and even created fake vendor accounts. The FBI took the case seriously, and Bart was charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He's now facing federal prison time. As for me, things finally started to settle down. With Bart gone, the rumors about me stopped, and people began to see me for who I really was, a hard-working, reliable member of the team. I took on the senior accountant role and made it my mission to ensure the department ran as smoothly as possible. Looking back, I'm glad I handled things the way I did. I didn't stoop to Bart's level or try to fight him on his turf. I let the truth speak for itself, and in the end, justice was served. Bart thought he could manipulate his way to the top, but his greed and arrogance were his downfall. Eloise was right, people like Bart always get what's coming to them. And when they do, it's so satisfying. Thanks for reading, Reddit. If you've ever dealt with a toxic coworker, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Maybe we can swap stories and celebrate some well-earned victories.